Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome each of you to this engagement revolving around the film Being Michelle, which will be released with picture-in-picture PIP ASL interpretation. Quite exciting. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Michael Kaufer. Today's discussion also serves as a celebration of Deaf Awareness Month 2024, as well as International Week of the Deaf and International Day of Sign Languages. I'd like to describe a bit of my experience after watching the film sometime last year at JCC during the Real Abilities Film Festival in New York City. After watching the film, I was incredibly touched because, well, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but the film truly speaks of the realities of what many deaf people go through in the prison system. Not only deaf individuals, but deaf plus disabilities. The film really stayed with me, and I'm looking forward to seeing its reach continue to grow and make further impact. Now, regarding the ASL PIP, of course, I can't share enough how excited I am because this is our language. Watching the film in English via captions is not the same as watching it via beautiful American Sign Language. Now I'd like for each of you to introduce yourselves and share your role in this movie. Let's start with May. Hello, my name is Dr. May Kennedy. I am the Social Impact Advisor on this film. I am also a mother of a son with autism, and I also have a deaf father who went through 7.5 years in federal prison. So my experience navigating that is what led me to this film. It's so important, like you said, to highlight her experiences and frustrations due to the failures of the system to accommodate. This is about Michelle's life, yet her experiences are not uncommon. This is a typical reality for many. I believe this film creates a strong impact of the importance of the right to communication access. Thank you. Next, we'll go to Lisa, please. Hi, my name is Lisa Gonzalez. I work for the State of California Department of Developmental Services. I'm also an aunt of a deaf woman that has autism, too. So through navigating that experience, and after seeing this film, it was incredibly impactful for me. As has already been stated, this film does not only impact those that view it, but it impacts individuals indirectly as well. The rates of individuals with autism are growing, and autism diagnoses are predicted to continually increase. This film really brings forward an open discussion. Most individuals who have experienced incarceration feel shame, yet this film encourages an open conversation, which is something that makes this film even more meaningful. I first got involved and met Michelle in Redwood City at Bravemaker, where I also met Del, May, and Atin, the whole team. It was truly a perfect weekend where we had the opportunity to have in-depth conversations. I felt such a connection and knew I wanted to support going forward. Thank you, Lisa. Next is Delbert, please. Hi, my name is Delbert Wetter. I am the executive producer of this film and have been in the film and entertainment industry for 25 years. I have worked within a variety of genres such as animation, documentary, and live action, to name a few. I am also serving on the board of a nonprofit organization, Disability Belongs. This is the name sign. That organization is how I learned about this film. I was instantly drawn to it. I am a father of a boy with autism. He is a coda. The film touched me on many levels. As a deaf person, as a father of an autistic child, I saw how powerful this story was and how it could create impactful change. I knew the Being Michelle film and Michelle's story would do just that, cause a change. I am excited to be a part of that. Thank you all for your introductions. This is great. I'm delighted to have you all here this evening, or day. One thing you are already aware of, but for the viewing community, is that Being Michelle won 2 awards for feature documentary. The first was at Signlight International Deaf Film Festival, hosted in California. The second at Clin d'Œil, which is a well-known festival in France, in the town of Reims. Best Documentary Feature was awarded at both festivals. It was incredibly inspiring to see that happen in person. Now, I'd like to ask Lisa a quick question. Do you remember the moment they introduced us to the sign for documentary? Was it by CJ, and do you remember who the second person was? Was it Niall? During a discussion about the film? Yes, maybe it was. Yes, we did. We were discussing international signs, and help me with this, Michael. But many signs were discussed for documentaries such as these. Were there any more signs that I missed? I think there was also this sign. Yes, you're right. That was another one. There are quite a number of signs. So perhaps you all, the Being Michelle team, could discuss and choose one sign to use throughout the world. Another task for you. Okay. I have a question for Lisa. Are you ready for your first question? Yes. So you were there at the Clin d'Œil Festival. I saw you go up on stage with the director, Atin Mera. Could you tell us how it impacted you, knowing this was a U.S. recognized film now on an international stage, a 2-in-1 there? Oh, it meant so much. All day, Atin and I had been talking over things. The time of the awards ceremony was getting nearer. As we arrived, being in a room full of all movers and shakers, people who are creating change within the film industry, was incredible. Then, Being Michelle was called. What a moment. From on stage, you could see that people were in such solidarity. We are with you. And I wish Michelle could have been on stage to see it. All of her experiences, 5 years in prison, everything she ever went through in her life, that night was like total validation. You matter, and your story matters. Seeing that was truly inspiring. And Atin did such a great job. I want to applaud him for it. You could feel the energy from the audience. And Michael, so kind, was there on a video call with May, Atin's wife, so that she could see everything going on. It felt like the whole team was together. No matter where we were in the world physically, we were still connected that night. Atin, wow, ensured this was led entirely by the deaf perspective, including Michelle all the way through editing and the creation of the fonts made by Michelle. It felt like all of those efforts were truly recognized by the international community, and they really treasured it. All of the conversations that this film sparked in the week prior, throughout the screenings and events, culminated in this moment, and I was thrilled to be a part of it. Plus, the award itself was crafted by a deaf man. It was just so touching. Everything was really through and through by deaf, for deaf. It was such a special night that I will always remember. Yes, I remember that night and how special it was for everyone. All right, now I have a question for May. Can you share a little about the impacts of viewing the film, both from the community and the system perspectives? System meaning other communities within the system. How do you think it impacts? I think the film has incredible impacts. The first in spreading awareness. From a storytelling perspective, in addition to what Lisa stated, this film is from Michelle's perspective. This is her story. So Michelle herself was a big part in how her story was going to be told. Surrounding her story are multiple issues that impact people when they see it. It stays with you and encourages conversations about what's happened to this system and why it's happening. Michelle's story is not the only one. This happens to so many. So the question is what we can do in order to break these cycles within the system. I'd like to add to your statements here. Impact. From a storytelling perspective, as stated previously, it's one thing to explain what needs to change, yet explanation without example does not leave a mark on people. Our film shows the scenes of what really happened in her life, the communication breakdowns, the failure of the reading of the Miranda warning. All of these issues are played out through real-life examples. We see a real-life example of no access to communication in prison. Other inmates can work to shorten their time served, but Michelle, without access to communication, is incarcerated longer. Giving examples like that are necessary for greater impact, which is the power of this story. The issues I've just put forward are not new ones. There are many out there who are aware of the issues, but they don't know what to do, may not fully understand, or it doesn't incite a feeling in them, so they don't care. You can't help but be touched by Michelle's story. You glimpse through her eyes in the examples shown. Then the issues are felt and become personal, all of which helps in our battle to change the system. Exactly what Dell said, absolutely. I think this film pushes the conversation further, where people start to ask, what can I do? That is so very powerful, and it's why raising this awareness is so important. Great. Thank you both. One thing I'd like to clarify for the audience regarding the word and sign of system. May, would you mind expounding on what the word system means and entails? While the majority of this film highlights and takes place within the criminal justice system, such as in prisons, jails, and courtrooms, system in general refers to lack of access to services throughout her lifetime, which includes child welfare, mental health support services, a wide range and spectrum of services that she did not receive. Those gaps in the system led to the instances seen in her story, with police, court, and prison. So that's more of what is considered to be the system and what I mean. Anything to add here? Our film shows within a variety of systems exactly where the failures are. Not only did the criminal justice system fail, but the foster system failed as well. They did not act to protect Michelle when she was a child. The mental health support system, social worker support, and more, independent living center support, there were and are so many failures within those systems. If they had been in place, it would have provided fixes much earlier in her life, and Michelle would never have had to go through all that she did. We see the result of the system's failures on so many levels. Lisa, you'd like to add something? Yes, also coming from Michelle's perspective, as we see throughout the movie, there are many things down the line that really should never have happened. Psychiatric exams and proof of mental competency are very critical. I used to work in court as a deaf interpreter, 14 years full-time. Those mental health competency evaluations on record are key. When those items on record are not met, any future arrests would not bring the individual directly to jail, preventing a recurring cycle of imprisonment. That one step is so critical. I think that, as all here have mentioned, the system from the bottom to the top had many areas where intervention was possible, but that did not happen. She grows up in that cycle and becomes imprisoned for so long, living there as her trauma worsens over time. It is heartbreaking. I'm thrilled to say, though, that over the years, many agencies, from the FCC all the way to the school levels, are becoming enlightened. Police departments, many more, have been impacted, all from this one powerful film. It is a catalyst to conversations that lead to cross connections. I have met many people, and producers and the Being Michelle team are both zealous in their efforts to develop questions and educational materials to help schools know how to process this movie. Some even have supports in place for emotional responses and triggers. It has caused a complete shift in our way of thinking and how policies are being written. I'd love to see more change across the board. I'd like to add to that, speaking of how it can affect youth, not only in the example Lisa gave, but I think it also really encourages self advocacy skills. The knowledge of what to do when facing police and what their rights are. The film asks the question, do you know your rights? That's all a part of growth, and I think it's impactful in how it encourages taking a deeper look into how they advocate for themselves. Thank you all for expounding on system. That really helps. Delbert, I have a question for you. This is a really important question, not only for the general public, but for filmmakers, those in industry, production companies, and the like. Now, you have extensive experience within the film industry. Would you mind expounding a bit as to what was involved in producing Being Michelle and how this film came to successful completion? Why is this film so important? Would you mind sharing your experience involved with independent documentary filmmaking productions versus the larger company networks? More than one question here, so I can assist in filling in where needed. Take it away, Delbert. Yes, I'm happy to answer. The director, Atin, is a hearing individual. Atin documented Michelle's life for many years. He followed her and her story with his camera. They lived in close proximity to each other, so he could continue documenting her story daily. But he knew he was working from a hearing perspective. He knew he had to partner with deaf filmmakers to ensure that Michelle's perspective was central to the story and not told from or centered around the perspective of a hearing individual. All too often, 99.9% of stories and movies and in television, when there is a deaf character or a deaf story, it is always told from the hearing perspective. Hearing writers, hearing directors, hearing cinematographers, hearing producers. Atin did not want this film to be part of that statistic. He wanted this film to be different. He knew how special it was. Atin searched, met me, and asked me to become involved. We became a team. It was a unique collaboration between deaf and hearing filmmakers, all with the same mindset, which was how to make sure Michelle's perspective was central, at the forefront, and spotlighted. Other hearing filmmakers, when preparing to tell a deaf story, tend to reach out to other hearing individuals for information on deaf people, instead of getting it directly from the deaf. That's why this film is unique, as Michelle is the one who tells her story. She also told her story in different ways, such as explaining to us through sign language and providing further details after having intentional turn-based conversations with follow-up questions. We were able to improve our understanding of her story through her sharing of her experiences in this manner. We inputted what she shared into captions. Notice the yellow captions on screen. Those words are directly from Michelle's story. But when Michelle and other deaf individuals watch the movie and see those captions, how can one be sure they are really from Michelle and feel a greater sense of connection to the story? Atin had the idea of asking Michelle, who is an incredible artist, to draw the letters of the alphabet. Those were drawn and scanned, and that's what became Michelle's caption font in the film. So she could know that those were her words that she was seeing on screen, directly from her sharing her story with us in sign language. Reenacting scenes from her life to tell us her story was a third way in which Michelle told her story to us. And then, of course, through her art, depicting the scenes and her experiences of what happened. Similar to a comic strip where her life scenes were laid out in comic strip box format. Before that, no one fully understood everything that had happened to her. It was difficult for people to communicate in an effective way to understand her experiences. They could not work past the initial ambiguity. And yet, through those 4 communication avenues, the fog dissipated, and her story, along with our understanding of it, became as clear as day. The best part is that we were able to have the entire story told from Michelle directly. Wow. Would either of you like to add to that? Yes, I'd like to add a few things here. When Atin first started filming Michelle, the filmmaking process wasn't clear to her. So Atin brought her along as he filmed in other places and recorded some animals they spotted. Michelle later watched as Atin edited the clips together and instantly understood the process. She was able to tell her story in front of the camera, knowing what it all meant. I'd like to add one thing about the reenactments. Atin had explained to Michelle that he wanted to film the prison reenactment scene and wanted to get an actor for it so Michelle would not be re-traumatized in any way. He said it would be a body shot where the actor's face would not be seen, but Michelle was the one who said she wanted to reenact the scene from her life as it was her story. Atin did what she asked, and she wanted to share her story in that vulnerable, brave way. Touching. Such an important story. Lisa. Yes, I'd also like to talk about the incredible production impacts after filming for Michelle. Michelle was involved in the editing process, and there were times where she did not want certain scenes included in the film after seeing herself and realizing it was not what she wanted to express. Atin honored her requests and removed the clips she did not want included. The whole team honored her and her story to be told her way. There was never a thought of doing things without her or ignoring a request from her. It was an empowering experience for her, giving her full confidence in knowing that the film was entirely her own story. At the production's completion, a new perspective was gained on the film. And throughout screenings and showings across the country, the team will FaceTime with her so she can see the audience and what's happening at a screening. It becomes a healing experience for her. Often we'll share the stories of what people have shared with us after they've seen the film. Now she's much more sure of herself, vibrant, knowing her story is not the only one, that she is not alone anymore. Thanks to the production team who did such a great job in working with sensitivity, who were supportive, comforting all the way through to the end, showing the utmost respect. One of the reasons why that was so important to us was because we recognized that throughout Michelle's life, she had no voice. No one listened to her. No one paid attention to her cries for help. She was neglected and ignored. When it came to filming her story, we knew we did not want to repeat history, nor did we want to add to any of her lifetime of traumas. We wanted to make sure she had full control of her story and could express it on her terms. It was important to us to ensure that happened. And you'll notice in the end credits after the film, the first name that appears is Michelle's. All to honor her story. From beginning to end, her story, her way. I'd like to add one more thing before you continue, sorry. Sure, of course, May. But I think it's important to emphasize here that, as Del mentioned, Atin is a hearing person, which means he would be filming from a hearing gaze. Yet he let deaf individuals transform the story. He worked with Michelle and called upon deaf individuals, the deaf community, to become involved to ensure the story was represented well. That is so powerful, knowing it did not become a hearing-led story. It became deaf-centered and deaf-led. Powerful. That's why the awards from the Real Abilities and Clandoya festivals are so special, because the deaf community recognized our efforts. Those awards in particular mean much more than any award received from hearing-led festivals. The honor, the value is much greater because we received their recognition, their approval, their love and acceptance directly from the deaf community. We worked really hard to ensure the deaf community felt seen on a global scale, that the world could see our experiences through our own eyes. Wow. I'm a little at a loss for words, as I remember watching the film for the first time, and even all the way up to this point, still every time I see the name being Michelle, it strikes me. Now realizing the incredible collaboration of the community within the production, the crews, everyone working together to invest in Michelle so she was able to tell her story in her way rather than us controlling it. That is really powerful. And it shows through those two specific awards. It says it all. Now, I'd like to add one answer. I have goosebumps. Yes, go ahead. To your second question regarding, sure, the difference between independent films and large studios. I think what you just stated is the perfect segue. If this was made by a big studio, we likely would not have had the power to do that at all. As independent filmmakers, we have complete power over the process. The con is not having enough funding, which means being frugal and having to get creative with out-of-the-box thinking in how we approach the filming process. But there's great freedom. We can decide what to prioritize and what's important to us, which was Michelle telling her story and all that entailed. So I'd like to emphasize that. Large studios can provide plenty of funding, but they would have control too. We'd want to prioritize Michelle and her perspective, yet they may oppressively reframe it, and that's always a risk. You never know. That's the biggest difference between the two. Some deaf stories are made authentically all the way through, down to the crew, as the production team can bring on deaf individuals. In the system of big studios, this kind of film would never get made. So that's a big challenge. I want to share one short story that I think is important for the audience to understand, perhaps. I was on the Clandoya Festival team in Rance, and there was so much work going on in those 5 days. Everything was a beautiful experience. Yet the best part about the whole thing, the absolute best, can you guess? It was when Tin found out the film won. He had been notified, and of course every film was a winner. They were all winners. The best part, literally, and I still remember the moment to this day, he made the time to call Michelle through FaceTime. He was on the call with her and brought the phone to me so I could meet her for the first time. It was really touching. Michelle and I chatted for some time, and I forgot everything around me, all my responsibilities, and just had a chat with her. That was a gift, so I'd like to thank Tin for that. And that's touching. Okay, to wrap up, as we'll soon be wrapping up here, I'd like for each of you to state your greatest hope for future impacts from this film. What you want to see happen. Let's start with Delbert and we'll bounce up from there. Go ahead, Delbert. I hope that the lessons learned from watching this film reach far and wide, impacting not only the systems mentioned here, but in the fields of education. For deaf individuals, deaf plus, deaf and disabled individuals, that it empowers them to protect themselves, to not be afraid to assert their rights, to connect with each other, to find ways to communicate. For example, through our travels and screening the film, we've noticed a recurring theme, which is that a CDI is so important. A certified deaf interpreter is valuable. The utterances made in courtrooms and from police officers, take the Miranda rights, for example, are said and written in complex English legal jargon. For many deaf signers, English is our second language. A CDI gives access to understanding that language. Many times, the world's perspective is to simply hire an interpreter and call that access. But accessibility without understanding is not true accessibility. This film makes that clear. If you want to provide accessibility, provide it and ensure understanding is there too. If understanding is not present, bring in a CDI to help make things understood. Michelle's issues would never have happened if a CDI was there from the beginning. Instead, the issues escalated throughout her life when they could have been addressed at an early age. That's just one example where I hope that the knowledge of these issues has people start to think about how to fix them and that it spreads far and wide. Thank you, Lisa. I hope for several things. I know we all have big dreams for this film, but I can say that I've already seen some of the beginnings of conversations happening surrounding the creation of trainings due to this film. I hope to see more within the mental health space. Michelle's experiences were not caused by her own doing. It was the doing of everything around her, the neglect, the cycle of misplacement, If in the beginning she had appropriate services, as Dell said, a CDI, working with her to have better understanding, the trajectory of her life would have looked much different. So I really hope to see more mental health services. They are getting better for deaf people, but there is improvement needed for deaf plus individuals, the whole spectrum. You look at deaf plus and intellectual delay or intellectual disability, concepts need to be repeated, and art is used to clarify feelings and experiences. Don't forget them. Deaf individuals plus CP as well. I want to see more services for the sub-marginalized. Deaf plus epilepsy, which causes forgetfulness, affecting what is learned. That's what I mean by deaf plus. Deaf plus autism as well. Interpreter trainings and knowing how to work with individuals with autism. Often they are expected to maintain eye contact when it is a struggle for them. Modify your approach to working with them if necessary. I'm happy to see some interpreter training centers begin testing for that knowledge. I'm looking forward to seeing how it impacts preventative measures. Without interpreters, deaf people should not get in prison just because the judge can't communicate with them. We need to do better, instead of putting deaf people to jail without ensuring understanding. Interpreters have to become uncomfortable with not interpreting if they notice full understanding is not there. Start narrative interpreting, not sounding in spoken English to the judge like the deaf person has complete understanding. Who can intermediate in that process? The interpreter. Michelle did not have interpreters at all in her experiences, but this could have affected her in the beginning when she was a child. I see a lot of changes impacting schools. This film is causing conversations. It is important to support the whole person from those different parts of life. I see some changes and remain hopeful. And I see less shame. I used to see a lot of shame and instant judgment. This film gives understanding by showing how each event led to the next one. Shame is out of the picture. Instead, it's more of the thought of how we can do better. I'm really pleased to see the deaf community unified and in support via outreach for this film. It's so nice, and for a cause that is for the better. I foresee we'll have more hopeful programs. Thank you. May? As I watch these two, I really share the same hopes that this will continue to impact the communities at large, and its powerful message will have far-reaching effects of change. The system, again, I feel is not being held accountable. We don't have places to reach out to in order to hold people accountable for not providing services, for not providing access, for not doing the right thing from the very beginning, causing years of failures with unspeakable repercussions such as the ones we see with Michelle. She is not the only one out there with these experiences. I share the same feelings that have been expressed today. I feel it's so important to hold them accountable. It feels complicated, not knowing how or where to start, but it all starts with the community. The community can create movement together and push for change. It will create an impact. I also wanted to add from what Dell mentioned about the importance of CDIs. Yes, it's so important, and it's still new, as many places don't know what it means. I think it's important to keep in mind one thing here. Michelle is the one who brought this up to me and had me realize it. We, the deaf community, place VRS calls through an interpreter anytime, for any reason, to call the doctor or to place an order for something. When Michelle makes a call, there is a struggle. She said the interpreters don't understand her and she doesn't understand the interpreters. That was eye-opening. We have to really think and remember that the Deaf Plus community is struggling to receive the same kind of access that we receive every day. We need to figure out how to make sure their level of access is elevated to the same levels as everyone else. Thank you, all. I would like to add one big hope from my perspective, which is that the Being Michelle film should become mandatory material for every program, such as police, fire, and EMS departments, doctors, all programs, that they all must watch this film to understand. The whole point is communication. Don't take that for granted. We, as deaf individuals with backgrounds that have gone through education, can write to communicate. It's still not perfect, but how much more for them? Everyone should be aware of those things. It's so sad. We're in 2024 and we're still behind. Okay. May. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but I'd like you to close by letting the audience know where they can get more information about this film. Yes, I hope after watching the film you felt it has impacted you, and if you'd like to become a part of the dialogue that is happening, you can host a screening anywhere in your community, local high school, library, local advocacy groups you know of that you'd like to show the film to. Become a part of the conversation by visiting www.beingmichelle.com and fill out the form to request to screen the film. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which is important because when we see any opportunities and needs for advocacy, we will share that with you, along with announcements for when the film is being screened, all of which you can share with your community. So please sign up. Thank you. Thank you all for your time and sharing all of your experiences with Being Michelle.